Welcome to Education Forum. I'm Herman Badillo, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the City University. The improvement of education affects all New Yorkers. This program will focus on the key educational issues and challenges before us all. My guest today is Robert Kiley, who is remembered as an outstanding Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, but who has, in the last few years, been an equally outstanding President and Chief Executive Officer of the New York City Partnership. The New York City Partnership is a leading business and civic organization in New York City, and they are involved in public and private matters with different agencies in the area of housing, education, and job creation. Today we're going to talk about the areas which they're involved with, the City University and the Board of Education. Welcome, Bob, and tell us something about who makes up the New York City Partnership.
Well, thank you, Herman. It's nice of you to invite me, and it's good to be here. The New York City Partnership consists of just over 200 of the largest corporate and civic organizations in town. And our focus, if I could maybe slightly oversimplify it, is on trying to continue New York City's preeminent global stature now as the world's leading financial and commercial center. So we concentrate on all the issues that contribute to that, making it a better and less expensive place to do business. We concentrate on housing and education and transportation because our CEOs tell us that those are the issues that really drive the decisions they make about making more investments in New York City.
Now, you are involved with us at the City University at the site of City College with a real unusual project called the New York Structural Biology Center, which would create a state-of-the-art development. Tell us about that one.
Well, several of the leading medical institutions are part of the partnership, and in discussions with the leaders of those institutions a few years ago, we noted together as a group that New York was gradually losing its position as the most important medical research center in the United States. We were slipping in our ability to get major grants from the National Institutes of Health. We had actually slipped from #1 in that regard down to #3. And out of that came the realization that with all these splendid institutions, 9 or 10 of them, in the state, most of them with major activities in New York City, there was a tendency to be very entrepreneurial to an extreme. But whereas NIH and the federal government want to support clusters of research, so we lag behind in collaborative efforts. So the New York Structural Biology Center is actually a collaboration of 9 major medical institutions under one umbrella. They've collaborated, they've raised money amongst themselves, we've helped them raise money. This center is going to be located at the City College campus. It will focus on the application of very high technology, nuclear resonance, high-powered microscopes to...
It'll be one of the most important in the country, I think, if not in all of the countries of the world.
Well, I think this will be, at least for a time, it will be the world's leading center, and it should reverse the slippage that we've experienced, but much more importantly, it will be an attraction for the young future superstar researchers to come to New York.
And we were successful in getting the governor to approve in the budget the funds that we need to start the project. When do you think that that can get underway, and when do you think the project can be ready?
Well, actually, the design of the building up on the City College campus is at about 100%, so it's ready to go. We know the equipment that we need to buy. We've already been negotiating with the manufacturers who will compete for our business. And now that the last piece appears to be slipping into place, which is $5 million that the governor has put into his budget through the City University construction program, we could start construction imminently. I should add that this center now has been separately incorporated. It's standing on its own 2 feet. It has its own board and its own leadership. We still are involved, but basically this ship is ready to be launched, and our hope is that it will be up and ready for operation within the next year.
Another project that you've been working on, especially with Borough Manhattan Community College, is a business incubator center, which you also have spun off on your own. Tell us about that one.
We have under our umbrella something called the New York City Investment Fund, which is a fund searching for emerging businesses with about $100 million in capital to bet on the ones that look like they're really going to stay the course here in New York City. Now, one of the projects that we've entered into with, again, CUNY, down in Lower Manhattan through the Borough of Manhattan Community College, is an accelerator that potentially will have as many as 20 companies within it. CUNY, we, and a third party co-investor will have equity positions in the accelerator. The idea is to invest in these early companies, help them propel themselves forward, and then move them out, spin them off so that they'll be on their own 2 feet and replace them with yet more companies. And the Lower Manhattan project is now moving forward. And our hope is that over time, over the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be able to replicate this project in Lower Manhattan with other accelerators in the other boroughs at a CUNY institution of one sort or another. CUNY itself, as you know, Herman, is launching its own incubator project where we will be collaborating as well. And the incubator will be driven actually by CUNY as against the accelerator, which is really driven by the New York City Investment Fund.
Well, the idea is, first of all, to provide additional jobs in New York City, but also to give opportunities to the City University students.
Well, it will give, hopefully it will do all of those things, and it will give CUNY another incentive, another carrot to use in attracting first-rate faculty and to develop postgraduate programs in the sciences and engineering, which are desperately needed in our community. That's one of the missing links in our town, which has many of the assets that you have come to expect in New York City, but we're not quite there in being able to focus our scientific and engineering potential on economic development, and that's a critical reason behind the development of these accelerators and incubators.
Well, the advantage that we have is that in Lower Manhattan, we have a building which was donated to us, fortunately, and therefore we can work to get a piece of the equity, which will be helpful to provide us with funds to do the things that we need to do at the City University.
Well, it's very creative because by CUNY in Lower Manhattan and in other boroughs making available real estate, in effect they get credit for that and become an equity investor, and they get the potential for the returns on that investment. So it's really a win-win for everyone.
No, I want to get some of the other colleges involved as well. Now, you have also worked with the Board of Education, which is of great concern to us, because, as you know, our students come primarily from the Board of Education. And we find that many of them, when they arrive at the City University, are unprepared. I know at Borough Manhattan Community College, I met with some students some time ago, and they were very upset because they realized for the first time in their lives that they didn't have a real high school diploma. And they were worried that they had to take so many remedial courses, and that makes it difficult for them to graduate on time. So tell us about some of the initiatives that you've been working on with the Board of Education.
Well, our Bellwether Project, if you will, is an investment that we have made over the next 5 years in 2 of the poor performing community school districts in the Board of Education. Both of them are in Brooklyn, one in East New York and the other in Ocean Hill, Brownsville. And the idea here is to incent the management of each school, as well as of the 2 districts, the superintendents and the principals and the assistant principals, as well as the teaching staffs as a group, to elevate student performance very substantially. If they succeed in doing that on a year-by-year basis, they're eligible for very significant cash awards. By the same token, if individual principals or the superintendents are unable to show real improvement in education performance, they have to pay the consequences for that as well, which is to move on to something they're able to do and not stay in those positions. So this is a real test financed at this point entirely by the private sector, at trying to create accountability where there really has been none for at least a generation.
And when will you know whether the test has been successful?
Well, as a matter of fact, we just recently were able to make some judgments based on the results of last year's school year. It took a while for the data to be assessed by the Board of Education. But of the 30 schools in our first district, we're in 2 now, but we were in 1 district last year, 6 were actually able to meet their improvement goals. Now, we've got to do a lot better of that as we move along through this 5-year cycle. We would like to think that a majority of those schools can improve at an accelerated rate. But we think it's a good start for 6 of the 30 schools to have actually made their marks. And we've just announced that the appropriate people will be getting incentive awards.
And these are elementary and junior high
These are
school?
elementary and junior high schools.
And the test is based on the performance of the principals and the teachers, or just the principals?
Well, the overall criteria revolve around the total numbers in a given school, and you have to get to a certain point, a threshold point, where attendance is where it ought to be, the incidents of discipline are where they ought to be, and then when you get to that point, you're then going to the major indicator will be how well you've done in the standardized tests, which are based on the new standards that have been introduced into the system. And it's really those test results that will drive whether or not those schools succeed in getting the awards.
What have you found is the key performance indicator to success in these schools?
Well, the key we have found so far is two-dimensional, but the absolutely indispensable first step is in every school, and indeed in every classroom, to be doing diagnostic work, assessment work on individual student progress in those courses. You do that by administering quizzes, by taking an analytical look at the materials that they produce, and it gives you not only an insight into how each student is doing, but it tells you how the teacher in that class is doing. Where we find that teachers are weak, they're then assigned a more senior, more experienced teacher. We call it a lead teacher program, lead instructor program, and that mentoring then intensifies, and these assessments continue through the school year. So by the end of the year, there is a really good picture of how each student in that particular building is doing and how the teachers are doing, which enables the principal and the superintendent over the principal to make judgments about what ought to happen to individual teachers.
Do you find that class size is an important factor?
Class size is clearly a critical factor in the early grades. The research seems to show that as you move along, it's probably a less important factor. But in those critical early years, when kids' attention span is a little shorter, and when teachers need to intensify their attention to individual students, it's clear that smaller class sizes really make a big difference. And that's a problem in New York City, because when you start talking about class size, smaller classes, you're talking about the need for more teachers, for improving our buildings, which are not in great shape, so it's a huge challenge.
We'll be back after these announcements.
Help wanted. Immediate openings available for the most important jobs in America, helping the organizations that help children. Whatever you can do, in whatever time you have, you can make a difference. To learn how you can help in your community, reach us at this web address and number. We're fighting for the children. Whose side are you on?
We're back today with Robert Kiley, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the New York City Partnership. Now, the New York City Partnership was started by David Rockefeller, right?
It was started by David Rockefeller and other leaders of really the financial services industry in the late 1970s. It was a response really to the fiscal crisis.
The fiscal crisis, yeah.
And the idea was that the business community was not really focused on what was happening financially in both the city and the state, and the thought was that there ought to be more vigilance. But maybe more important than that was the idea that some of the problems that the city and state had been coping with, trying to spend money on them, not very effectively, perhaps the business and civic community could proactively get into some of these issues at an earlier stage, at a less expensive stage, and through forging private-public partnerships, save taxpayers' money and maybe actually solve some problems. And I would say that model works pretty well. In housing, for example, the partnership got involved early, 15, 16 years ago, and we've now completed 20,000 units of affordable housing, all revolving around the idea of home ownership in 55 different neighborhoods in all 5 boroughs. I think arguably what we're doing and a few other organizations who do home building is that we have played a critical role in revitalizing these communities.
Well, you're very helpful to us in the Bronx because we have almost rebuilt the entire South Bronx. And one of the things that helped was when the partnership got involved in providing some housing to be the anchor for building other housing in the area. So that's been very important.
Well, the South Bronx is a completely changed community. I was bemused when the big debate over Yankee Stadium began because it was based on outmoded views of what the Bronx was like, a very changed community. And actually that debate gave everyone an opportunity to revisit the Bronx, and I think they saw that it was a really different and better place.
But you also have some additional programs in education. For example, what is the David Rockefeller Fellows Program?
Well, the David Rockefeller Fellows Program is really an opportunity designed and targeted at up-and-coming young executives in both the for-profit and not-for-profit sectors in New York City. These are people who are just getting to the level of senior management, probably in their early 40s, and this is an intense effort over a year at getting real exposure to leading public officials. They get immersed in problems that the city are groping with. Just the other day, they went out to Rikers Island to look at what happens there. It was a real eye-opener, I think.
How many of those young men are?
Anywhere from 10, they're young men and
women,
and there are between 10 and 15 that go through the cycle each year. Very successful program because these are the future civic leaders of our city, not just business leaders.
Well, I'd like to get some more of the City University graduates who have gone into business into that program.
City University is, of course, a partner in our organization, a member, if you will, and you can nominate someone right now. In fact, the nominations are closing at the end of this week.
Okay, we'll get to it. I'll talk to Matt Goldstein and some of the people at Baruch College, because I'm sure we have some graduates from Baruch who would absolutely qualify.
Or senior people, people at the level of dean or senior vice president of the City University.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm also interested in anything that has to do with employment for our young people, and I'm interested in your youth employment and education program. Tell us about that.
Well, this is really the evolution of the old summer jobs program. You remember that in the wake of the urban uproar of the late 60s, the Kerner Commission, among other things, recommended that there be initiatives to get young people into jobs during the worst part of the summer season. And out of that has come a different, and I think more interesting and more helpful idea of trying to make these part-time employment opportunities, not just during the summer, but year-round, available to students as they get to the high school age, but based on what it is they're actually doing in high school, to try to get some symmetry between the part-time employment experience and what they're actually learning.
Yeah, what we used to call in the 60s the work-study programs.
Well, it is a variation on this theme, except they will continue to go to school. We're heading toward year-round school, most likely, so this will eventually be a 12-month-a-year program. And we're starting modestly. We'll have at least 75 such internships, as we call them, this year, but we'll be shooting for 150 the following year. And if we succeed at this, we're trying out various models of how this might work. Then we'll really, working with the Board of Education, scale it up to a point where really substantial numbers of young people can be involved. You know, we had this horrible problem of kids getting to the 9th grade and then just disappearing.
No, that's the biggest problem we have.
The single biggest problem.
That we have a huge percentage of students who drop out in the 9th and 10th grades. Well, and the reason for that is because of social promotion, they really are several grades behind. And when they get to the 9th or 10th grades, they're 17 years old and they can quit school legally. So that's where we get the dropout
Well,
rate.
one idea behind these work experiences is because lots of times these kids don't have a realistic appreciation of the workplace. Some of them have given up on the idea of doing conventional work. This would try to break into that cycle at the 9th grade level. Maybe it has to happen at the junior high school level eventually, to give these kids real exposure, and by real I mean real jobs, not just fake jobs, not just show up and we'll pay you if you stay off the streets.
What kind of job? Give me an example.
Well, it could be jobs in the retail sector, in financial services, really entry-level type jobs where you're watching and learning, but you're also doing. We hope to work with an increasing number of magnet schools that might specialize in environmental studies, for example, in Lower Manhattan, or the Financial Services Academy, and to play off what they're offering to get kids real work experiences in organizations that are actually not that far away from the high schools.
So how do you choose these kids?
Well, they apply for the program, and you know, there is at the moment not really a demand problem, because that is, we can handle the kids that are interested because we're going slowly. We're working in 6 high schools. But eventually, if the program is a success, there will be a supply problem, that is supply of jobs. So that's why we don't want to rush into this thing, because we don't want to let a lot of kids down. Because you have to be in school, you have to be successful in that sense, but the requirements aren't going to be any more stringent than that.
And if you help them graduate from high school, then you would help them get into college as well, right?
Well, eventually...
Or at least you can tell them about City University.
We can certainly tell them about City University.
Yeah.
And I think it's exciting that the new chancellors in both institutions, the Board of Education and CUNY, are really talking to each other now very, very aggressively about working together, not only in providing better trained teachers, but in providing better opportunities for kids who actually do stay the course and get their diplomas in CUNY itself.
Well, this is the most important program, because while all the newspapers are saying that we have the lowest unemployment rate in generations, the reality is that in New York City, we have a very high unemployment rate among young people. And the reason for that is what we have been discussing, that they drop out in the 9th and 10th grade. And a recent report indicated that 87% of the business leaders say that a high school diploma by itself isn't worth very much anymore.
Well, one very grim statistic is that in as many as 25% of our community school districts, which have chronically failed the kids in these schools, when you start in kindergarten, you have a much greater chance of being in the criminal justice system than you do of getting a high school diploma. And the statistics, grim as they are, bear that out. I mean, that is a very, very, very grim future for a kindergartner or a parent of a kindergartner to be facing, and it's just intolerable.
Well, we have to catch it, as you say, even before high school, because we've gotten now at the City University to the high school level with expanding the College Now program to the 9th grade. But we need some institution that will go back into the middle schools. And maybe you can think in the New York City Partnership.
Well, we're in conversations with Junior Achievement of New York about trying to help them leverage their activities in the lower grades in ways that that can be sustained throughout the career of students. And they're in 250 or so schools already, so they're already up to scale, and we think that we have the potential here of a joint effort with them, working with the Board of Education, to bring the world of work on a much more pervasive scale to the Board of Education.
Now let's talk about charter schools, because you have been very much involved in the charter school movement. How do you find that to be working out?
Well, to be candid with you, I don't think that we in the city are moving with alacrity and verve and daring do to take advantage of the charter school legislation that's been passed. And I think there remains an overhang of skepticism about charter schools, a feeling that competition really is not welcome, a feeling that somehow we can muddle through the traditional system. And my feeling is that the more we can put pressure on the existing system, which is a huge monopoly, to change, the better off we're going to be. And charter schools, which basically enable parents or other institutions to get into the schooling business, they'll have to meet all the standards and other requirements that the state lays down, but they will, in effect, take the initiative to form their own schools devoid of many of the bureaucratic encumbrances and some of the collective bargaining obstacles that you find in the school system
You
itself.
think that Chancellor Levy might be less defensive about establishing charter schools?
I was speaking to him about this yesterday morning. I think it is a strong card for him to be supporting and indeed to be playing, because he knows that there are too many community school districts that are failing, and that this is one way of putting pressure on those school districts to change what they do.
Good. Thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Okay. You can reach us by email at our website, www.cunytv.cuny.edu, or write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. We look forward to hearing from you.